kind of a slightly different topic. This one by Mentis Wave. Oh, this is a new Mentis Wave video. Grift of Evading Criticism by Equating it to Harassment. Oh, this happens. This is the entire point, by the way, of like the whole oppression thing. This is the point of it, is that you become uncriticizable. And I talked about it before, but I remember this being a thing on Tumblr where you would get into an argument with somebody, and if they didn't like your point, they would basically like start casting their buffs, and whoever had the most buffs wins. Basically, it would be like, well, it'd be like, oh, I think this, and the other person would be like, that's really insensitive of you because I'm this, and then it would be like, well, you know what though, like I'm also that, so like it's not really, you know, that doesn't make any sense because I'm also that. Yeah, but you're not also taking the fact that I'm this too, and it's like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm also that. It's kind of like that, and then they would argue about it. And then they would be like, well, how can you even say these things because you don't understand me, because you don't have these conditions. It was always like that. Thanks for the follow, Craig. Thank you. Let me never fall into the vulgar mistake of dreaming that I am persecuted whenever I'm contradicted. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Hey, internets.
I'll talk about it a little bit more later. We'll see like how much the video goes into it, but I have some personal experiences with this.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, that you wish to make some philosophical, ideological, or otherwise political content. But you have a slight problem, and the problem is you really aren't that clever. You are by no means stupid. In fact, your parents and teachers probably told you that you were quite bright when you were growing up, which means that you're probably smart enough to understand and adopt the dominant ideology of the current status quo, or the cathedral, or the regime, as it's sometimes called, or as it's otherwise sometimes called, believing whatever the heck your Marxist sociology professor crammed inside your head, but you're not really quite bright enough to question those ideas. The result of this is that you might find yourself ending up as a content creator who makes a bunch of videos consisting of cathedral-approved PC content where you push the ideology of wokeism and strawman everyone to the right of Obama as an evil newtsie while drastically misunderstanding the very philosophy you are attempting to
I don't like
it. It may end up even looking like this.
True.
The alt-right playbook from Innuendo Studios. A series of videos mostly...
Oh, Dan is a straight-up call-out post. Also nice Fumo.
Between 2 to 6 minutes long, but some longer than that, where multiple...
Do you guys know about Fumo investment economy? That like that if you invest in Fumos, like the price appreciates, you can sell them for like 300% more later.
Fallacies are committed in order to...
I should totally start like my own currency that is Fumo based. As in like we get a warehouse full of Fumos, and then like you can trade in like one thing for a Fumo of equal or lesser of equal value. Fumo coin. Yeah, Fumo coin. What do you guys think? It's a Fumo backed currency.
Prove that anybody even slightly right-leaning is in a pipeline.
Leave Fumo. What? Have you seen the shop at angelsword.com? Have you seen shop.angelsword.com? Have you seen the Asari Fumo and the Leaflit Fumo that can be yours for only 50 USD? It's also really high quality, trust me. We're really proud of them. They're really nice. Really, really, really nice. And all the clothes are like actually like actual clothes. They're very good. Trust me.
Become literally bad mustache man. And this of course comes with a very serious
support
drawback,
your
which is that
ASS
people
today.
will eventually call out some of those logical fallacies and prove that you don't really know what you're doing, and you're instead again just regurgitating whatever your Marxist professor told you to think. Something I myself have done once before. One of my older videos of the Ma variety was just Ma hierarchy.
Yeah, it's kind of hard. Like you have to constantly be challenged in like what you believe, because then that's how you actually start to like develop your actual idea of like what you understand about things. Otherwise it's like you believe something but you don't know why, and then that makes it like way easier to attack and makes you way easier to be like, oh, I don't, I'm just right, I don't want to talk about this.
hierarchies, which in many ways was just pointing out why Innuendo Studio on the alt-right playbook Always a Bigger Fish was guilty of a moralistic fallacy. Any philosophy, when you give it a praxis for creating or maintaining human civilization, must exist within reality, not some magical prancing unicorns of Disney World, where the concept of hierarchy has somehow been magically abolished just because you think hierarchies have moral questions behind them. Or in other words, if you think that 1 + 1 = 9 would be good, because you think that would allow us to create infinite wealth, that doesn't mean that 1 + 1 = 9. It's very obviously invalid reasoning. But of course that doesn't matter. You just keep on making these videos. But there's a bit of a problem, is that people keep on bringing these criticisms up. And so the fact that much of what you've said doesn't actually make any kind of rational sense is starting to slowly creep up on you. But fortunately for you, the ideology of wokeism provides an easy exit for you. And this is the simple strategy of falsely accusing those who have criticized you of harassing you, which is pretty much what this video right here, the alt-right playbook, Why Don't You Respond to Criticism, boils down to. Now, I've talked about
I should check that out later.
This particularly dishonest tactic before in my first video on Gamergate and refuting the Wikipedia article about, and how the mainstream media coverage of the Gamergate incident.
Usually it starts off with, why do you even care? That's like it starts that's like the level 1. Level 1 is like, why do you even care about this? And then like if you keep pressing it further than that, then yeah, it starts to go into like well, I'm afraid of you. You're not, you know, you're a bad person. It starts to go into like, because then they start to attack you yourself because they can't attack your argument. That's basically how it goes. It's easier to attack the person who's like speaking the argument rather than their argument. In those cases, because once you're stuck against the wall, you can't really logic out what you believe in a way that makes sense. So you have no choice, basically. Your choices are either to say, oh, you know what? I think you're right on this. Sorry, I was wrong. You know, you changed my mind. That's like the one thing that you can do, or you can stick to your guns and just say like, you're a bad person.
Was extremely biased to the point of being intentionally deceptive. Intentional logical fallacies are used by various media pundits all the time, which is why I am partnered with Ground News. Different media sources can report the same story in ways that makes it look like the exact opposite of what's going on is true. And Ground News helps you...
Yeah, they do this a lot, like where they say something like, I see that Dr. Monster says, why do you even care enough to change it? Yeah, this happens a lot, where they'll change something, and then you'll be like, I don't like that. And they'll be like, why do you even care? It's like, well, I care because you're doing something that I don't agree with, basically.
See through this bias by compiling thousands of articles and organizing them by their bias and political leaning, with features designed mainly to save you time in comparison to if you were to try and do this by yourself. For example, there are many articles going around this month on what's going to happen to Donald Trump's legal troubles and criminal charges since he became president-elect last month. Kind of puts a whole damper on the whole thing, doesn't it? And Ground News provides a lot of features to help you easily sort through these articles and see through the bias. First off, it gives a nice summary of the issue. Prosecutors don't want judges to toss out Trump's criminal conviction, but recognize that keeping it going would be difficult since he's now president-elect. So they are instead trying to stall the case. It also gives a summary of different sources reporting on the topic. Right-leaning sources seem to suggest that prosecutors are obsessed, going too far that the whole thing is lawfare. Center sources simply state the DA wants to pause the case but uphold the conviction until he leaves office. And left sources like MSNBC reported as if bad orange man is using his election win to evade justice. If you were to ask me, the whole thing is dumb since it was a victim.
My favorite one right now that they're trying to do is they're saying basically that Donald Trump isn't the president and that the real president, the real shadow president, is Elon Musk. And it's kind of crazy to think about like that being actually used as an argument right now against Donald Trump when you could literally point at Joe Biden and be like, wait, who's the real president? If you guys think this guy is not he's not of his faculties enough to like run for president, and like we had to like swap him out with Kamala, who's the president now, right?
Crime anyways. But Ground News can help you come to your own conclusion. Let's easily see which sources are reporting and how, such as with this handy bias distribution chart, or with things like this that let you see who owns the media sources reporting on the topic. You can also click on a source to be taken directly to their version of the article, or find similar articles quickly and easily via the...
Have the Democrats gone full QAnon? We've gone full circle.
There's also Blind Spot, which lets you see at a glance...
I actually don't know much about QAnon, the whole QAnon thing. All I know is that it was like some conspiracy theory that was like posted, I think, on 4chan, where a person basically claimed that they're from the future or some shit. Isn't that what happened?
Topics that are being ignored or underreported by various media sources based on how far to the left or right they lean, which lets you see things...
It's like some kind of modern day John Titor.
that you might ordinarily miss due to the reporting bias. Lastly, Ground News is
Yeah, that's what I
independent
thought.
and subscriber funded.
Okay.
So to get the same features I have, you can go to ground.news/Mentis Wave or scan my
Leave for president 2020. Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't want to be the president. That seems awful. Like,
QR code
I
now
would,
get 50% off
I
advantage
wouldn't actually want to be the president. To be fair,
plan, which gets you unlimited access.
was it on 8chan?
The grift
I
of
see.
conflating criticism with harassment is fairly straightforward. Person A will
Yo, is
say
this Zone
something
of the
that ranges
Enders?
from
Yo, it
just kinda
is.
stupid to completely factually inaccurate.
This
And
is a good fucking game, by the way. Zone of the
then
Enders.
person B will come in and explain
Vic
why
Viper.
what person A said
That's the one that can
makes
turn into
absolutely no sense.
Vic Viper's the one that can turn into a plane, right?
And then person B will come in and explain why what person A said makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And then person A, rather than acknowledging the fact that they just got BTFO, will then find a way to accuse person B of harassing them. Now, of course, in this particular context of an individual face-to-face interaction, it's pretty obvious why person A is full of it here, to the point where you
Nice
almost
hat.
don't even need to explain why. Most people can probably intuitively understand that person A is just trying to avoid
Wait, nice hat. Wait, what? Oh,
this interaction. It's pretty obvious why person A is full of it here, to the point where you almost don't even need to explain why. Most people can probably intuitively understand that person A is just trying to avoid admitting that they're wrong.
I've literally had this happen to me where I got into an argument with somebody. I had this person who was my friend. They don't like me anymore. But basically, I got an argument with them, and I brought up some points, and then they basically said like, I thought you were a bit like. They would basically use like these sort of veiled insults. Like they'd be like, I believe in this. And then I would say like, well, I think that's wrong because of these reasons. And if like anybody that like, anybody that's my friend, I can't really be friends with somebody that like can't discuss beliefs. Like people that like will get mad if I challenge like what they think. And it's I just can't. But anyway, so this person was like telling me something. I told them like, well, I don't think that's right. And like, here's why I don't think it's right. And then they basically went straight to, I thought you were a better person than that. Right. So like, rather than like actually addressing what I said, they just went around it and like went around it and started attacking me directly. And I basically brought it up in the argument. I said, you're not engaging with like my argument. You're choosing not to engage my argument. Instead, you're attacking me directly. And I basically said like, I don't appreciate that. Like, I don't think that's right for you to, I actually find that to be really mean that you're attacking me instead of my argument. Right. And this would happen like a couple times in which I would say the same thing. And I would engage with them in a discussion. And then I would say like, you're attacking me directly. You're attacking me directly. Like you're attacking me directly again. Right. And then it got to the point where they basically said like, I'm afraid of you as a person. Like you are scary. Like I'm afraid of you. And then after that, like they just stopped talking to me. And yeah, it is what it is, I feel bad about it because like I really did consider them a friend. And I actually was upset about it. Like I actually was talking to my other friends about it and how I felt really bad about it because I considered them a pretty close friend. And it's like, I don't know. I guess I was wrong. You guys ever feel that? Where like, you're like, I thought we were friends, but then you're like, I guess you didn't really see me as a friend. It's like, I get that a lot, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm just retarded. I don't know.
But interestingly enough, the rabbit hole on this one goes much deeper, and that's what I'll be explaining in this video. Because despite how
Leaf, you should have activated your trap card. Got to attack the monster on the field first before you can attack me directly. Have you forgot?
We've forgotten the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah.
It continues to be extremely common, in part due to people usually only recognizing one or two things wrong with it, and the obvious lies on the surface of it, and also in part because it's very easy in certain contexts for the situation to not be as obvious. For example, say in the context of the internet. In online discussion, a post that goes viral can get hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of views, sometimes hundreds of millions of views. And if that post that goes viral happens to be a very highly factually inaccurate, otherwise kind of stupid statement, then of course you're going to have thousands upon upon thousands of people replying to you, explaining why you are wrong, but then of course you're also going to have a few people who don't explain why you're wrong, and will instead just leave a simple comment like, wow, you're dumb. Yeah, welcome to the internet. And so in the context of a viral post, what person A can do to kind of obfuscate their grift is to instead cherry pick all the posts that are simply calling them dumb, and then collectively accuse everyone of harassing them, while pretending that the posts that contain genuine criticism don't exist. And so the more people who are involved in the conversation, the easier it becomes for person A to get away with this kind of false accusation.
Dude, it's kind of bad. It's kind of bad because I'm almost the opposite of this, but in a bad way. Basically, like, what happens is I'll read the comments, and like Julio knows this too, where I'll read the comments and there'll be like a bunch of people agreeing, and then the one person that disagrees with me, it's like disagrees with me, like I feel like I have to reply to them. I'm like, really? And then I'll talk to Julio about it, and Julio like, you're dumb. You're literally getting like 1% right now. Like literally like one person. Yeah, you're getting one guide. Yeah, it happens to me all the time.
Because it becomes harder and harder for people to dig through all the mud that is the context of the conversation. And so the criticism equals harassment grift can actually get pretty darn complex. And in that regard, I'm actually very glad that Innuendo Studios created this video, because in it he kind of accidentally gives away just how strongly encoded this particular type of false accusation is in the sort of progressive postmodernist woke ideology that he follows. And how when you fully understand it, you actually begin to notice another flaw in woke ideology that most people don't even notice. And so I'm actually going to go through this video bit by bit. I mean, it's not even 7 minutes long, and you will come to see just how tellingly absurd this whole thing is.
Say, for the sake of argument, you're the kind of progressive lefty with a platform who gets a share of harassment, seasonal or perennial, from reactionaries. In this situation, you will...
This isn't really fair, though, because everybody... I mean, that's kind of the nature of being a content creator. Like, am I wrong about that? Like, I feel like if you're a content creator and, like, you have, like, you know, your opinions out there, like, it's just a natural, it's natural that you will get criticized for it.
Inevitably hear one who positions themselves as a reasonable moderate ask, why don't you respond to criticism? There's a lot going on in that question, more than is immediately obvious, and it's worth understanding.
So yeah, within the first 20 seconds or so, he's combined two fallacies in a very interesting way. Specifically, he's starting out combining collective guilt with a false dichotomy. Everyone's either an evil alt-right reactionary, and thus collectively guilty of being bad mustache man, or a sensible moderate that doesn't actually have anything of value to say, which of course is completely disconnected from the reality of how the discourse actually goes. He's basically implying that there is no legitimate criticism, just evil newtsies and centrists who don't know what's going on. I can, again, just use my own interaction with Innuendo Studios content before as an example of how this is dishonest.
By the way, like, I think this happens, I think, in like the entire spectrum. I don't think it's necessarily like only like a left-wing playbook. It does happen as well, like on the other side as well.
My video on hierarchies pointed out, again, a very real problem with his, well, utopian thinking. And then he blocked me on Twitter. And so that's a very important part of the
classic
criticism equals harassment grift, is that they have to pretend that no legitimate...
I don't think I actually block anyone on Twitter, actually.
Could possibly exist. Everybody who even suggests that there is has to be a bad person, trademark. And so in order to sell the criticism equals harassment grift, the person partaking in it usually has to start out with some kind of false dichotomy in this way. You either aren't criticizing them and are just some random person with nothing interesting to say, or you're a big bad meanie head. Therefore, anybody who actually does have legitimate criticism gets swept away into one of these groups and ignored.
You can ignore it, yeah.
That there's no way there could be any kind of legitimate criticism that they're ignoring. But don't take my word for it, he actually admits this in the next part of his video.
First, is that the question is not only directed at you, it exists as a marker showing up in your Q&As, your comment sections, your Twitter threads, to imply to anyone paying attention to you that there is some wealth of legitimate criticism that you have long ignored. There may well be a specific point this person is referring to, but it's often left unspecified or generalized, so that the content and the quantity of the criticism is left to audience imagination. It is meant to publicly undermine your legitimacy. Second, it's meant to make you question whether there is some legitimate criticism out there in the din of people screaming at you.
So yeah, a few things to point out here before moving on. First off, you may notice that he's simply doubling down on the false dichotomy, and then starting to give a very bizarre mind-reading argument where he accuses the centrist of being in on the scheme, and therefore everyone criticizing him is in fact secretly a Nazi, and that there's just no possible way any legitimate criticism could exist. But a big thing to point out here is just how very rarely this specific question actually happens. The question, why don't you respond to criticism, is pretty darn rare in terms of replies to political videos and content. And partially I know
it's usually like an actual like about an actual thing that they said.
This because I'm a content creator myself that gets a few views. My videos get about 1,000 comments on average. And I have seen this particular non-specific comment directed at me exactly never. Now, of course, I am a Mises Caucus libertarian, which is very different from a progressive wokist like Innuendo Studios. So to be fair, we can't just use the fact that I never get this question directed at me as evidence of anything. So I decided to go and take a look at one of his videos.
Uh-oh. He's getting the receipts.
Used the site to scrape about 7,000 of his comments, and the number of times that he had this question directed towards him was exactly 0. I even tried rephrasing the question such as, you should respond to criticism, or as an accusation such as, you never respond to criticism, or this guy doesn't respond to criticism, which interestingly enough not only also has 0 results, but when typing it in to look for it, I found this comment right here. This video has been debunked point by actual justice warrior, and secondly, this guy doesn't understand conservative positions at all. So not only
that actually is like incredibly common where people don't understand, like I've encountered this a lot where I'll have a discussion with somebody about like a certain point and they completely don't even understand like what your position is on it. Like they'll just, it's like some kind of like, I guess you could call it a straw man. It's just like some made up idea of like what they think that you believe. So when you actually like try to like break it down into like more digestible chunks for them, it's like then they kind of start to get like upset about it.
Is this question, why don't you respond to criticism, a question that very rarely comes up. Genuine criticism to his videos is not only more common, but I actually found it accidentally, which just emphasizes how completely disconnected from reality this false dichotomy really is. Not only is it a false dichotomy fallacy that he's committing here, but one side of this dichotomy doesn't even really exist. And this is kind of another side tactic that often comes hand in hand with the criticism equals harassment grift, which is complaining about a problem that doesn't actually exist. Putting emphasis on statements that very rarely come up, as again a way to distract people from the genuine criticism.
Like a good one, like I'll give you a good example. It's one where you're like, let's just say hypothetically, like your argument is like, oh, I don't think there should be like, I'm trying to think which one's better to use. Okay, let's say like you say, oh, I don't think that children should be, I don't think that children should have like transgender stuff applied to them because they're children. They don't really understand much about life yet. Let's say you use that argument and then immediately the argument would be like, oh, you hate trans people. You want trans people to die. It's like, wait, I didn't even say that. You know what I mean? Like it's like, and this happens. I mean, I could go on and on. You could be like, oh, I don't think abortion is good. And be like, oh, so you want women to die. Like it goes immediately from like 0 to like full hit instantly. It's pretty wild.
So specific criticism rather than the unspecified, subjective question that Innuendo Studios is complaining about, the one that he's trying to use a false dichotomy to pretend doesn't exist, is way more common. But it gets better. Check this out.
You're not perfect, and a knock-on effect of being harassed is you get numbed out, unable to discern good faith from bad, often removing yourself from the very streams through which your peers used to correct you because of the endless flow of garbage coming through those channels now. But the only way to verify the ambiguous
God, look at all that coom water.
Claim that there is some criticism worth responding to is to once again strap on waders and climb back in, which is
why is she getting in the coom water?
So this is where things get very interesting, because he's now accusing the sort of non-existent straw man that he created through, again, a false dichotomy of trying to confuse him and obfuscate the conversation, when in fact this kind of gaslighting is exactly what he's doing to his audience. By using an animation of toxic sludge being dumped into a river, he's trying to paint the whole act of looking into what the critics are saying as a waste of time. And so that way his audience won't even want to look for the criticism as a result of this kind of rhetoric, which is again a very important component of the criticism equals harassment grift. The The actual point of the grift isn't so much just to falsely accuse somebody of harassing you, but rather it's to trick other people into thinking that legitimate criticism doesn't actually exist. And so in this sense, the grifter has effectively convinced their audience to stop thinking for themselves. Don't look at what those evil reactionaries
it creates a position where it's impossible to be wrong.
Saying that's a big waste of time. That's not fun. That's like bathing in toxic sludge.
Like even bringing up that they could possibly be wrong is like, you can't even do that, basically. It's like it's a self-protecting ideology.
Take the blue pill instead, stay in Wonderland, which really shows just how manipulative this type of false accusation really is. It's meant to keep people...
Basically, it's not, it's an ideology that's not, it's an ideology that's like, it's self-protecting, and it doesn't make it easy for the person to understand that they could possibly be wrong and change their mind. It protects, like, by immediately discrediting any sort of criticism. It's kind of like the same thing with like an echo chamber. It makes it so it's incredibly difficult to actually get out of that. Like it's hard to be wrong, basically, when you create this kind of like self-protecting opinions.
Asleep. It's meant to make you think that questioning the flock would just be a big fat waste of time. And this is why I often call it a criticism equals harassment grift, because it's often just a scam that a demagogue is using to ensure that the people listening to them don't question them. Anyway, next up is when things get a little bit weird.
Third, well, the question isn't really, why don't you respond to criticism? Odds are you do respond to some criticism. People in your position are often addressing or preempting criticism all the time, arguably too much. No, what this non-specific question is really asking is, why don't you respond to my criticism? They'll let it sound like you've been ignoring everyone, but they mean, why are you ignoring me? They're going to insist you owe them a response, that their critique, regardless of your opinion of it, is valid and demanding of immediate attention. Odds are there are dozens of people saying the same thing, all at the same time.
And so the next part of the criticism equals harassment grift is to just double down on the fallacies with complete nonsense. For instance, you may have noticed that he's now doubling down on his false dichotomy that he made earlier and creating a new straw man out of it from a type of critic that, again, rarely ever even exists.
So it's a Ouroboros level ideology.
Yeah, basically. It's a freaking snake sucking itself off.
Here lies in the fact that, yes, you do indeed get a lot of criticism when you make philosophical, ideological, or political content. I would know because I get that kind of criticism all the time. I'm often reading my comments to see if there's anything interesting that is worth clarifying, and I've explained those.
Me too. I that's why I always feel obligated to respond to like negative comments more, because I want to clarify like wait a minute, I don't actually think that.
Clarifications further in some of my other videos, as well as in my QA videos. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all demanding that
That's why I repeat myself a lot, by the way. Like when it comes to like a point, a lot of times I'll reiterate what I'm saying just so that it's absolutely clear.
Respond to their specific criticism. Most people understand that when you respond to a video that has 100,000 or so views or more than that or whatever, you're probably not going to get a direct response from the creator, simply because that's too many comments to sift through. But that doesn't mean that you, as the person who created the content, can just completely sweep it under the rug. It's good to occasionally address some criticism. But then again, what exactly does this have to do with all of these critics somehow?
Well, but the thing is, you'd be able to find it, I guess, right?
Being big bad meanie bobinis? Absolutely nothing. So yeah, this is another interesting aspect of the criticism equals harassment grift, is that it's all kind of sleight of hand. The topic is being shifted now into something else entirely. Now, instead of a person giving a vague, non-specific question of why don't you respond to criticism, again, which is a question that is very rarely asked, now all of a sudden we've done a 180 here, and it is a specific question, and it is specific criticism, and he's just whining about how he doesn't have the time. But that doesn't mean that they're harassing you or trying to delegitimize your authority or whatever, which just completely contradicts everything he said in the first minute and a half of his video. Is the criticism specific or is it not specific? Is it subjective or is it objective? This isn't a case where you can have it both ways. But let's just move on, because next up is when things get even more interesting.
Fourth, odds are good that you have in fact addressed their specific complaint, but not in a manner they will accept. This one person's criticism is likely not unique. You may have covered it somewhere in your output purely because you know what kinds of...
Milkway says, I came from the YouTubes. Welcome. Thank you for watching. Watching YouTube. The YouTube team has been doing a good job there. I really appreciate them a lot. And this is probably going to be a video. Basically, Julio and Crazy do the videos. I do the streams.
Likely not unique. You may have covered it.
You love the gun
somewhere in
stuff?
your
Thank you.
output purely because you know what.
We were talking about guns earlier today. I'm probably gonna do a gun stream tomorrow, either tomorrow or Thursday. I'm gonna show off some of my guns on stream.
Criticism is likely not unique. You may have covered it somewhere in your output purely because you know what kinds of arguments are getting thrown at you, and you're just covering your bases. There's a decent chance your critic doesn't actually consume enough of your work to have seen it, but it's maybe even more likely that they are fully aware of your counter-argument. You know, maybe one of your fans directed them to it. But they don't consider a response. You know, maybe one of your fans directed them to it. But they don't consider a response legitimate unless it is directed at the critic. Covering it in a different context or on a different platform doesn't count. They are owed a statement they can respond to directly because they want the argument to continue. So really the question is, why don't you respond to my criticism on my terms?
So if you're particularly adept at spotting psychological manipulation, you might have noticed that what he just did there is pure projection. So now he's finally admitting, okay, there is some criticism, which again contradicts what he claimed in the first part of the video, but never mind that. He's now implying that, well, yes, he has responded.
He's basically moving the goalpost. Like, he moved the goalpost and then moved the goalpost again and then moved it again.
To their criticism already. In fact, he may have responded to the critics many dozens of times. Or maybe not him, but some other social progressive wokist has responded to their critics many dozens of times. Does he provide any examples of this? No. Well, sort of. He kind of alludes to two examples. Mainly, he's alluding to Anita Sarkeesian and Francesca Ramsey, two people who are fairly well known for two things. One is being inorganically boosted by corporate media organizations, and two is for being roundly debunked on pretty much everything they've said. And no, they haven't addressed those refutations. And again, he's providing these examples in a manner that is so completely non-specific that he doesn't even name them, let alone mention what the specific criticism was, or give us any context to go by at all. Which is completely hypocritical, because his main complaint at the start of the video is that the question, why don't you respond?
You know what like a major problem I see in this, just like society in general, like just kind of an observation that I made, is that I think people need to understand that it's okay to be wrong about stuff. It's okay to be wrong about stuff if, like, you are presented with, like, the facts of something and then you're like, oh, okay. Like, I can see how I was wrong there. Like, fair enough. That's why you hear me say that a lot. You hear me say fair enough a lot because that basically is me saying, like, okay, like, you're right. Right? And people have a hard time with this. Just, like, being like, okay, well, you know what? Maybe I got the facts wrong there. Right? Maybe because I mean the thing is in life there's so much information, there's so much knowledge on like everything really. You're just bound to get something wrong if like you make an opinion on anything, right? You're at some point like someone's gonna have more information on a topic than you, and then they're gonna say like, oh, actually, like, you know, there are some cases in which like that's incorrect, and you're like, okay, that makes sense, right? And I think people need to embrace more that it's okay that like if you make a mistake or you're wrong about something, it's fine to just say like, okay, you know what, like, you know, you're right on that.
To criticism lacks any specific context or any specific question. And yet here he is turning around doing that very thing, effectively giving an argument that amounts to, why don't my critics respond to my criticism of their criticism, and not giving any specific example. And so he's just accusing people of doing what in fact he's doing right here, which is, interestingly enough, an intentional component of the criticism equals harassment grift. Because again, the entire point of falsely accusing your critics of harassing you is to completely undermine any attempt to prove you wrong. And so by accusing their critics of being the ones that are trying to undermine them, they can further muddy the conversation.
Taking L's is hard if you're super bought in. If you have emotional, social or financial reasons to believe in something, what is truth in TH?
In the face of that. Yeah.
It can further muddy the conversation. A conversation that at this point is becoming increasingly circular. One interesting component of wokeist ideology is that it often suffers from a serious case of protagonist syndrome. In their minds, they are Harry Potter, and anybody who stands against their beliefs is Voldemort and the Death Eaters, or something similarly ridiculous. And so there's a lot of circular reasoning that kind of goes into the criticism equals harassment grift, because people suffering from protagonist syndrome cannot possibly even imagine that they could potentially be wrong. And so they start out with, I am right, therefore all of my critics must be arguing in bad faith, therefore they are actually harassing me, and I know that I am right because there is no genuine criticism of my position. Because of course genuine criticism of their position couldn't exist because they're the protagonist. So not only is this strategy of just falsely accusing people of harassing you, but in fact they're just pointing out why you're wrong, a very deceptive and manipulative strategy, it also exists to deceive and manipulate the person making it. So it becomes a form of self-deception as well, where the demagogue believes their own nonsense. And another reason it works is because woke ideology tends to believe very strongly in sort of the care-harm subjective morality of postmodernist ideology. And one of the major flaws behind this kind of meta-ethics is that anybody can claim to be a victim of anything in a way that is completely contradictory. So for instance,
especially nowadays, there's a lot of victim statuses that are like this is why you see a rise in people like self-diagnosing themselves with stuff. There's a lot of victim statuses that like buffs, let's just call them buffs. There's a lot of victim buffs that you can like apply to yourself that are like basically irrefutable. Because like if you try the irrefutable, you're like basically according to their logic, you're attacking like their very identity, and that in of itself basically makes you.
Our morality might say something like, you should feel bad because what you said was found offensive by this person right here. And you're not allowed to say that you're offended by the fact that they are offended. And why is it you're not allowed to say that you're offended by the fact that they are offended? Well, because doing so would point out an inherent problem with this kind of thinking, which is that if anybody can claim to be a victim of anybody for any reason, then if we were to translate this ethical model to a system of justice, then that would mean that anybody is allowed to enslave somebody else for any reason. Anybody is allowed to take away your property rights if they just claim that what you said is offensive. And the criticism equals harassment grift is really just an extension of this. Anybody can claim that criticism against what they are saying is harassment under the subjective model of finding whatever to be offensive. It could be the most legitimate criticism in the world, and you can still subjectively accuse it of being harassment. And that's how they justify all this nonsense to themselves. Because since they've accepted a form of complete subjective reality, in their minds they can honestly convince themselves that all criticism against them is a form of harassment, because it's all subjective anyway. The fact that they are a victim trademark is their truth, and therefore you are Voldemort and they are Harry Potter. It does not matter how rational your criticism is. You could have all the facts in the world on your side. You can show mountains of evidence that they are wrong. It does not matter, because you are Voldemort and they are Harry Potter. That is the reality that they have chosen. They've already decided that you are harassing them, therefore you are
That's why sometimes like I get into like arguments with people, and I'm just like, there's no point in this argument. Like this is there's literally like no point, because there's no convincing. There's no like you're not going to convince me with any of your arguments, because they like you're not presenting any arguments that would convince me, and then nothing I say, regardless of how true or how much evidence is behind it, it's so against your worldview itself. Like this is an issue of like at this point it's an issue of morality, and like you have like you have a different religion than me, basically. So then it becomes impossible, because there's no common ground to actually argue against. So it's over, and there's no point. It's like a waste of time at that point.
Harassing them. And so what this really shows is just how flawed care-harm morality really is. Because if anybody can subjectively claim to be a victim for any reason, regardless of whether or not that reason is good.
This is the problem with subjective morality, by the way. There's a lot of people that claim that like you can just be subjective about morality, but then it becomes like, well, what if I don't think that murder is wrong? Is it still wrong? And it just turns into that, basically. And then it just becomes religion versus religion. And then at that point, you can't really make an argument.
Then why do the allegations of harassment even matter at that point? And this is what I mean by the flaw in wokeist ideology, and often extremely far-left socialist activism in general, that most people don't notice. On the surface, it acts and pretends to be a moral ideology, and frequently gives moralistic justifications for its beliefs. But as far as actually having a consistent stance when it comes to meta-ethics, wokeism is
kind of ironically true. Kuro, that's what it becomes in the end, right? Like, for instance, like if there was a person that basically said like, oh, I believe my morals say that slavery is okay, and I'm like, well, it's not okay, because my religion says that that slavery is not okay. Well, then what do you do at that point? What do you do at that point besides fight each other? Like, what is there to do at that point? Right. Let's go like even more extreme. Let's say that there's a theoretical, like a hypothetical. This is a hypothetical country that believes that child abuse is okay. And then you're a country that believes that child abuse isn't okay. Well, what do you do at that point? If you tell them like, oh, child abuse is bad, obviously it's bad because it's immoral. Okay, well, my religion says it's okay. So it's moral according to me. Now you're like, what do you even do besides like actually either leave them alone? But like even then, like the morality would dictate that you actually have to do something about it, correct? So what do you even do at that point? There's no logical argument that you could make, basically.
Is ideologically bankrupt. It doesn't
This is why, by the way, I believe that America should invest in the military to be the most powerful force. That's the main reason I think that we should do that. I'm not saying that we should go fuck around and like, give money to a bunch of other people for like their militaries and like defend other people like because they need it. And I don't really believe in that, but I do think that we should have the strongest military because of that reason.
Actually include
because everything in the world in the end comes down to force, and that's just how it is.
Moral system within the foundations of its philosophy that makes any logical sense whatsoever.
Exactly what Marcus says. Force allows you to project morals. Yeah, exactly.
Include a moral system within the foundations of its philosophy that makes any logical sense whatsoever. It doesn't actually include any belief that morality, ethics, rights, and wrong are real things, and yet it uses moralistic arguments anyways. It's almost as if fraudulence is an integral part of how the ideology works. And when you realize that, it's actually really unsurprising that their immediate reaction to any kind of criticism is to try and grift. Try and lie and misrepresent that criticism is a bad thing.
How the fucking baby has freaking blue hair.
Even though they have no actual objective idea of what a bad thing is. But let's move on, because there's a few more things here that need to
God damn it, dude. Like, listen, my blue hair is natural, okay? This is not fair.
Pointed out and refuted.
Fine.
What's wrong with blue hair? What's wrong with it?
Finally, even if you did respond to them
Damn
by
it.
name, it's likely your response would still be disqualified. If you were to summarize their argument in any way, they would claim you are building a straw man. If you isolated any specific critique or pointed to the cruelty that accompanied it, they would claim you're cherry picking.
Fuck the mads.
So this is actually partially correct. There are definitely
Thank you, Baha. Thank you so much for the sub. Thank you.
people out there.
Yes, I
Thank you
agree
for the
too.
bits, Joel. Thank
We
you.
need a strong military because in the end, you don't do it. Someone you probably didn't want to use force will use it. A libertarian left alone fallacy.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to at some point, and it sucks, right? Like, it definitely sucks. Like, I don't think it's a good thing, right? But in the end, everything has to be everything is by force. Everything is by gunpoint. All laws are enforced by gunpoint. That's just how it is. Every single one is a threat of violence. So that's why I think that violence in of itself. So there's a lot of people that when you hear like the term violence, they believe that violence is inherently a bad thing. I don't actually believe that. I think that violence is actually neutral, and violence can be used for good and for evil.
Would claim you're cherry picking.
So
Reed
this is
Henricks
actually-
once told me that those who abhor violence can only do so because others commit it on their behalf.
Yep, it's true. Like, why do you think you live in a society that is like relatively safe? It's because of violence. It's because the good people have the power of violence. Good times can only occur when people who are good have a monopoly on violence. Yeah, when I mean violence, I mean threat of violence. Yeah, obviously. You disagree with violence being inherently neutral. Explain. What do you mean by that? By the way, if I put you on the screen, it's not because I'm trying to be mean or whatever. It's so it's easier for people to see who I'm talking to. You think it's a negative. You think violence is a negative that gets turned into an overall positive and neutral. Hold on. I think that it's a negative that gets turned. Okay, why is it a negative? Why? Okay, so you said that you think it's a negative that gets turned into overall positive, but you didn't define why it's a negative. Why is violence a negative? It's negative because it requires you to harm something or someone. Okay, well, let's say that you're harming somebody who is committing evil. Do you think that that is a negative? So like in the case, let's say that there's a person who's let's just go all the way. Let's say that there's a person that is sexually abusing children and killing them. And and then you find them and then you kill them. Is that you find them in the act of it and then you kill them in response to that? Is that violence? Is that violence negative? Before that, how do you define violence? Basically the projection of force, physical force. I don't ascribe to like the violence of words thing. I'm talking about like the ability to project force to force somebody to do something, whether that's forcing them to no longer exist or forcing them into submission. John says that the violence is defined by the use of force to oppress others. Yeah, sure, fair enough. Yeah, I'm talking about physical violence. Yeah, Manny Major. I'm defining it because Julio told me to define it, just for everybody, basically. It's basically projection of physical force. I don't believe in the whole mental violence thing. I don't really believe in that. So yeah, well, then it's a negative that is overshadowed by the positive of saving the child. So you're just saying that violence is inherently bad, like using force. Projecting force is inherently bad. The act itself is negative, but the result is positive. So this is, I agree with him on a mathematical and logical. I would consider myself a pacifist, says Manny Major. I think, I'm trying to think about this. So it's like, I have to think about it a bit. The reason I'm thinking about it is because I see where you're going with this. Physical violence, I don't know about. The act itself is negative. So the act of projecting force.
Remember,
violence
being
itself,
good does not mean being nice.
No. This is a good point. Hold on. Because normally violence is applied as a threat of violence rather than actual violence. Right? Because typically you try to abstain from using the actual act of violence. We consider the threat of violence to be better than the actual, right? Because I would consider the threat of violence to be better than the actual act of violence. Nature is inherently violent, though. Violence should be a last resort. Yeah, but see, Manny Major's the one who said that. That violence should be a last resort. Hoppy says, most of the times I've encountered violence, there was no hint or threat of it. Violence shouldn't be overwhelming in one direction. That one I disagree with. I think violence should be overwhelming. If you believe in your morals, your violence should be overwhelming. Your capability of violence, rather, not the actual act of violence. I think that kind of does make sense. What Manny is
Violence is a tool to be used when it's needed, but if a situation can be solved without its use, I think that's best.
Yeah, but see, Snoot, by saying that, I don't know if you agree with Manny Major or not, but by saying that we should abstain from using violence unless absolutely necessary, does mean that it's a negative, right? Because why would you abstain from doing something that wasn't a negative? However, violence is a fact of life. It even comes to our food. Yeah, but see, the fact that we abstain from using violence unless necessary. Stay sharp or get clapped. Yeah, but see the thing, see, even like just using like my own ideas of like, I don't want to use it. Does that make sense? Like when I carry a gun, it's not because I want to use it. I would consider it a bad thing if I did have to use it. At least, I mean, not a bad thing in terms of like morally bad, but like I don't want to get to that point. Ideally, that doesn't happen. And I think that's what Manny Major is trying to say, is that having to actually engage with the actual act of violence is not ideal. So like the projection of the projection of violence, like the threat of violence itself is not a negative, but the action of violence is negative. Does that describe your point of view, Manny Major? That the projection and the threat of violence is not the bad thing. It's the actual like that it's the projection taken to its final form, basically, is the bad thing. Is that what you mean, Manny Major? Yeah, I think the actual execution is what's negative. Fair enough. I think that's a good argument. Yeah, I can agree with that. That the actual application of violence itself is bad, but then the threat of the actual projection of force, the projection and the threat of violence is is neutral. The threat of violence is neutral. The act of violence is negative. Because even in the case of let's just use like a criminal for instance, right? I don't think that you really necessarily want to, it's that you have to. Does that make sense? I think that's the point that Manny Major is making, is that it's not an ideal. As in, like, if we could prevent if we can prevent violence from being necessary, then we would consider that ideal, which means that therefore violence is negative.
Not need it, then not have it and need it.
I'd rather have it and not need it, than have it than yeah. Thank you for the bit, Smokeway. Thank you. Julio says not necessarily negative, but also be less. Oh, I see what you mean. Well, why would we consider it? So you're saying, what you're saying, Julio, is that it's still a positive, it's a lesser positive? Well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, if the fact that we don't want to use violence would mean that the execution of violence is negative. Morally, you want to avoid using it unless necessary. No, it means the other outcome is better. But why is the other outcome better if it's not negative? I don't think Manny Major's not arguing that it's evil. Manny Major is arguing that it's negative. That it's an unideal, basically. By it's negative as in it's not the ideal. Right? Am I wrong, Manny Major? Am I getting your argument right? That you don't think that it's inherently evil, but you think it's a negative as in it's not an ideal. Manny Major says, I think it's along the lines of what I feel. I'm still going through it fully in my head. Yeah, it's kind of complicated. So that's true. It's not something that you just think of like on a base level, right? It's it's kind of like deep diving into like an actual like kind of the nitty gritty of it, right? What am I trying to say? It's like very specific, I guess. My gut feeling is I don't like violence in any form that acknowledges place. Saying something is a last resort or is less desirable choice doesn't mean that it's negative. Well, I mean, it does mean that it's negative, doesn't it? Because the fact that it's a last resort means that you see it in a negative way compared to the other option. If it's like the absolute last resort, that means that it's like it's the furthest point of negative. Again, it's not speaking as if like it's evil or not. This isn't like a question of evil. It's a question of like if it's a negative, as it's a bad thing to like actually get to. To me, the last resort means least positive, says Julio. But then, I mean, isn't that just semantics at that point? I guess it's just it's an issue of like definition of the word, specific words that are being used, right? But you still inherently understand, right, Julio? Like you understand that like it is. Okay, let's define negative as it's the last thing that you want to do, basically. Then you would agree with it, right? That it is like the absolute like final tool that you would want to use. Okay, let's move on. That was fun now. Let's move on now.
Pointed to the cruelty that accompanied it, they would claim you're cherry picking.
So this is actually partially correct. There are definitely people out there who will call any argument a straw man argument if it doesn't touch every single little tidbit, even if those bits have absolutely no relevance whatsoever to the central point. Or in some cases, when a person doesn't understand the logical conclusions of their own beliefs, and you call out those logical conclusions, they will accuse you of straw manning them because they don't know what those conclusions are. And so naturally they think that they're being misrepresented, when in reality you actually understand their own argument better than they do. And yes, this can also happen with accusations of cherry picking. Of course, the problem here is that Innuendo Studios actually does straw man and cherry pick quite a lot. I mean, remember earlier in the video when he created a false dichotomy between a clueless centrist with nothing to say and evil far-right reactionaries? And then he created a straw man out of the centrist, claiming that they're just trying to undermine his legitimacy, which again was pure projection, because that's
I
again what the
define positive as inherently adds value to a system, and negative as takes energy from a system. Good to be, it improves a system, and B.
And the bad is things that do harm more than needed. Something can be positive or negative, different to being good or bad. Well, yeah, good or bad being like, I guess, good and evil versus, yeah, that's what I was saying basically. I agree with that. Kind of judge not. Levi the Rich says the libertarian argument is fuck with me and I'll destroy you, says Leaflit. Yeah, but like you don't want to destroy them, right? Like the destroying part is the after they fuck around part, right? Like it's not like you want to destroy them. It's that you have to destroy them, right? You have to use the violence because it's an unideal, basically. It's unideal for you to have to project the violence, but you will. That's how I feel about it. That's how I feel about the case where like the guy like had to shoot the freaking 12-year-old. This like literally just happened, by the way. There was a guy, he shot a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old because they pulled a gun on him. It's like, is it ideal that like he had to shoot them? No, but was it a good thing? It was. It was a good thing. It was just, I guess, is what I would say. Is it just? Yes. But it's like he had no choice, right? I'd do it too if I were him, actually. If there was like a gang, if there was a gang of freaking 8-year-olds with knives, like 10 of them, there was like 10 8-year-olds with knives, and they were running me down, you bet your ass I'd shoot each and every single one of them. That's just me. I'm sorry. They fucked around and they found out. That's just the truth. Yeah, fuck them.
To do. It's trying to undermine the legitimacy of any critic by falsely accusing them of being bullies. But let's look at what he has to say next.
It seems first present the criticism full and unabridged.
It says, sorry, that shouldn't be funny. I mean, it's kind of like I value myself over than random 8-year-olds that are trying to like commit crime against me, right?
Before you may respond
That's
to
cold as fuck. Yeah, but I mean, I wasn't the one who created that scenario. Does that make sense?
Which is to say, the only correct way to respond to criticism is to platform the critic. And there are dozens who expect this of you, who will tear into you for not addressing in meticulous detail every single critique they have ever tossed your way.
I mean, like, obviously, there's you know, there's always like a reason to not do that. Like, for instance, like, am I in a car and then I have like like, am I in like a car and then there's like 10 8-year-olds with knives running me down to them in the car? Well, I can drive away, so like that's probably fine, right? But then, like, do I have to get out of my car and engage them? Like, that's probably not a good thing, right? But I mean, then again, like, what are they gonna kill the next person? Like it's complicated.
Way. And in the same breath, make fun of you for talking.
Yeah, drive through them, says Jojo. I mean, like, what if you don't have to drive through them? Then would you still drive through them? I mean, it depends, right? Like, are they like a roving gang that is like gonna attack? Ah, man, I don't know, because they're gonna attack the next person. So like, maybe then justice demands that you do run them over.
Much. Because they don't want to move on.
Like if it's a society where if it's a situation where like society is broken down and you know that like them attempting to rob you, and then if you get away, they're just gonna rob the next person in line. Then I guess justice does dictate that you could do something about that. Oh yeah.
From why don't you talking too much? Because they don't want to move on from why don't you respond to criticism. As a rhetorical tactic?
TV Broke says, low-key, the whole kids with knives thing is a trolley dilemma variation. It's a little bit different because you're in direct threat. You're in direct threat by the actions of the person. The traditional trolley problem is like when you have people that you don't know, and then there's just a numerical difference. Like there's like 5 on one track and then 1 on one track. Do you kill the one person? Do you endanger the one person to save 5 with the switch? Well, it depends. There's like so many things that are involved there. Like if it's like the traditional like 5 versus 1, and then like I have to physically move a switch in order to kill the other person, I actually think I wouldn't do it. But again, like there's a lot of like factors that would change that though.
It's pretty ace. To announce before the argument is even stated that it is thus far undefeated? Mwah. Because any response you make is going to keep the focus on you and not their argument. It's not worth responding to? Well, why should the accused get to decide what is and isn't worth responding to? I have responded repeatedly. Well, why didn't you respond in this particular way?
So yeah, speaking of straw man arguments, you may have noticed that he's once again building his straw man even further. Because again, remember, the actual number of people out there who actually ask things like this, actually ask the question, why don't you respond to criticism, is extremely low. I encourage anybody who thinks I'm lying here or misrepresenting the facts here to go to this website, commentviewer.com, and look up one of the videos by yourself. Make sure you set the page size to 500 and start searching through thousands of comments. And you will see that in response to political videos, a lot of these far-left socialist RedTube types, they don't actually get this asked of them very often at all. Rather, most of the criticism they get is very specific and cites a specific problem with what they are saying, and often will come with them mentioning a video that has refuted them. These sort of vague statements that Innuendo Studios is talking about are statements that almost never actually occur. And this straw man, interestingly enough, is actually alluding to another somewhat hidden component of the criticism equals harassment grift, which that it's trying to gaslight you into thinking that moderates don't actually exist, that they're just secretly a part of the radical crowd, which of course in his mind are all newtsies, and therefore the moderates are all secretly newtsies as well. And what is this all in an attempt to do? Well, let's just see the last part of the video.
None of this looks at whether the criticism had any credibility to begin with, only at whether your response is following procedure.
Yep, that's right, as I've kind of somewhat explained.
The fact that you said "that's me" the moment Hitler appeared on screen is wild.
No, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. I'm not literally Hitler. What I meant is like how they basically say that like he said he was like moderate people don't exist, and that they're like, no, what the fuck? What the fuck? Yeah, that one doesn't make sense. It's like a lot of the times they'll be like, oh, like, you know, Orange Man literally Hitler. Well, like, if he's literally Hitler, then I guess we'll see. We'll see if people literally think that or not soon.
Is to remove the credibility of the critic, because they are Harry Potter and all of the critics are Voldemort, and therefore they have no credibility. And while there is technically more to the video, it's mostly him just talking to the camera with bad Obama jokes, and how he's not a combination of multiple eels, and then followed up by strawmanning everybody on the right as a deranged warmongering neocon, despite the irony that the main trait of neocons is that they aren't really right-wing at all. So that's pretty much the extent of how it goes. Again,
that's actually the criticism of
Ladies
like
and gentlemen, we got her.
Harassment grift itself.
that's what like the criticism is of like people like Dan Crenshaw. It's like you're just fucking fake, you know? That's why they call them rhinos, by the way. Thank you for the bits, Milk. Thank you.
Is on its face kind of simple, but I'd like to wrap this up by going over a few more things that it implies and what it actually shows. Mainly that the sick, twisted irony of the criticism equals harassment grift is that the only people who actually do get harassed are the critics themselves. This is because false accusations of a crime are generally not that much different from a crime. For example, if someone were to hire a bunch of hitmen to come kidnap you and lock you up in a box for however many years, how exactly is that different if someone were to falsely accuse you of some kind of serious crime that carries a similar sentence in jail? And in what you're experiencing, at least, it really isn't that different at all. Now, under better moral systems like natural law theory, or even in this case just utilitarianism would be good enough, even just going by consequences, you can see how false accusations are a crime in itself. Whereas in the criticism equals harassment grift, since they go by care,
I think that they should go after people that make willingly false accusations purposely to get people in trouble. I think those people need to have more consequences, personally.
harm morality, and since anybody can again be subjectively claiming that they are being harmed or something subjectively for basically any reason whatsoever, regardless.
Like there's so many cases of like women, for instance. I mean, this isn't just like the women scenario. There's other scenarios of this happening where they'll basically accuse a guy of like, you know, of raping them, and it's just a grift, right? And then afterwards they're like, yeah, I just made that up. And then they don't get in trouble.
Of how ridiculous that reason may be under that,
and yet they like put the person's life through like so much hell.
Moral system, whether or not the accusations of harassment are true don't matter, because
it should be straight to jail, I think.
The accuser, which of course, when you compare that to better, more objective moral standards, it obviously no longer carries.
And by the way, I'm only talking about cases where the person is like very obviously, very obviously, they did it on purpose, just to mess with somebody.
Is the same weight. It's no longer a real crime. It's just made up fluff and nonsense.
It has to be like proven like beyond like to a high standard.
But of course, the people making these false allegations are trying to pretend like it does carry the same weight without actually directly stating that. And so a big part of the criticism equals harassment grift here is actually equivocation between—
Wait, hold on. Wait a minute. I can feel myself getting hotter looking at you. You should watch my video about why people like anime girls. That might be a good video for you.
in two different moral systems. They want to go by care-harm morality when accusing someone of harassment, where anybody is guilty of offending someone for any reason if that person says so, regardless of how stupid that reason may be. And they want that to carry the same weight as other harder, more objective moral systems. This way, they can justify accusing anybody of harassment, and in their mind, they're not actually lying.
Also, guys, you want to know what happened the other day? Sorry, this is kind of a tangent again. I'm so sorry to the editor of this video. Probably crazy. I'm so sorry. But the other day, I was trying to find. You guys know that guy on Reddit that was like going fucking ballistic. You know what I mean? Crazy. The guy on Reddit that's going ballistic. The one that like you were following for a bit. Yeah, I was trying to find that guy again. I wondered if he made a new account. So I basically like I did a Google search, and then like I did like a timed Google search, and like I had like the term set up. I wanted to see if like he was freaking out again. And you know what I found? I found Rule 34 leaflet. I didn't think it existed, but it does. And I didn't know that. I didn't know it was like on the actual website for Rule 34. And I was like, oh my God. There's Rule 34 leaflet. And my mom said, can I see? And I said, absolutely fucking not.
Under this sort of postmodernist subjective moral system that they follow. And the result of this, of course, the consequences, are that often those being falsely accused of harassment often find themselves being harassed in forms such as false flag reports, where a bunch of these neo-Marxists will then just false flag a post on the internet or a video on the internet, claiming that it's harmful or offensive, until everybody who's slightly to the right of Obama finds themselves shadow banned and demonetized, or just constantly harassed by a bunch of woke scolds, or you just find your account constantly getting banned, for apparently no real reason, or perhaps you might even lose your job as they call your boss, and repeat their false allegations, again using that little equivocation fallacy between two different moral systems to make those allegations sound worse than they actually are, and then you find yourself getting fired for, again, some subjective nonsense. That's where the term crybully really comes into play. A person who falsely claims to be a victim or who feigns emotional pain in order to manipulate, coerce, or threaten others. And again, on the surface, it's pretty obvious that that's what they're doing. But hopefully now you all understand the sort of weird, bizarre, self-contradictory justifications that they use in order to delude themselves into thinking that
it's funny because a lot of the times it's a lot of it seems like it's projecting, like almost all the time, like, oh, like you're racist, and it's like, wait a minute, isn't the thing that you just said like actually more racist? Isn't that like the actual racist thing what you're saying? It's always it's like the thing with California where they basically tried to repeal the law that made it illegal to discriminate. They tried to repeal it in the name of not being racist. But like in the name of not being racist, they were actually being racist, which is like
and then feel absolutely crazy. No remorse whatsoever as
the
trying
what
to
we
gaslight
talking
you.
about.
Thanks, Silver Digitalos. Thank you so much. We're talking about cry bullying right now. Thank you so much for 34 months. Thank you.
Wrong with their actions, and then feel absolutely no remorse whatsoever as they're constantly trying to gaslight you and accuse others of doing what they are doing. When in reality, if someone's go-to response to criticism is to immediately play the victim card, the chances of that criticism being valid are about as close to 100% as you can get. And this is why you can't just listen and believe when someone claims that they're a target of some kind of harassment campaign. You have to actually look at the evidence and consider the reasoning behind everything.
That's why I'm always like that whenever like I hear like some new person got canceled or something like that. I always want to know more. I don't like really believe like the immediate stuff. I kind of want to look into it usually.
Because people actually do have a very real incentive to make false.
That's why a lot of people are like, wow, you're defending like this groomer person. And I'm like, no, I just want to know what happened first. Like, I don't know if it's true.
False allegations of harassment, namely to psychologically manipulate you. They want you to join their side and go after.
You like the nunlet outfit more? I put the hat on.
The person that they're accusing, or give them money, donate to their Patreon, or otherwise support them in some way you normally never would if you knew that they were lying. Because ultimately, the mark in the scam of the criticism equals harassment grift really isn't just the critic. It's you, the person that the false accuser is appealing to, so that you will be manipulated into joining their side. That is what I really want to leave you all with. In the criticism equals harassment grift, it's not just the critic who is the actual real victim here. It's actually you. Your misplaced sympathy is exactly what the grifter wants. Anyways, that's all I have have to say. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment and all that. And if you really like my content and want to support me, you can do so on Ko-Fi, Subscribestar, or by buying some merch. And of course, check out Ground News. Links to all
That's fucking shirt.
that will be in the description below. That is all. Till
Wait, what's
next
this?
course,
This a
check
snake?
out Ground
What
News.
is this? Taxation and stuff? Damn,
Links to all
based.
that will be in the description below. That is all. Till next time.
Awesome. I also love the Fumos and the Fumo imagery. I'll link the video to you guys.